and I had a blast, um, because I got to talk for an entire hour and do crafty things. So I'll show you what I did, um, just so you know what you missed out on. Um, and Iris, I recorded it. So I showed how to cover a button, or in this case, this is what's called a Caboni ring. And so the this fabric is actually from samples of China silk that my grandmother had in her items when she died. So she died in 1980. I'm sure these were not a recent purchase when she died. So, um, yeah, they're ancient, but it's the best China silk. So they're like, 4x6 swatches. So I use those to cover um, buttons and forms, because then I can stitch into it. So here's another thing we did. This is wrapping a larger Caboni ring with yarn in this case, which is the beginning of a Dorset button. And I usually just do this part. I don't do the fill in. But I gave them a little demonstration of how you fill in the center to make a Dorset button. And I really don't have the patience to do these well. And then I showed them how to make a bullion. And so here is, I'm beginning to cover the outside of this. Yeah, that's the right side. Form, which I bought just because I like the size. I don't necessarily need the peace symbol, but it'll give me something to anchor some things to. So I'm going to do this around the outside, and then I have some beads and things that I'm going to put in. And so I like things like this because then every time I use this, I will know that there is a peace symbol inside. It's like I used to paint my toenails crazy colors just so I knew that they were there. And then I made like a decorative button out of I-cord, and we used the same stitch that you do for the Dorset wrap. It's called the buttonhole stitch, and I just made a shank for this so that it can be sewn onto something. So I just showed them how I started with a double knot, and then I did some weaving the ends in and out to get a shape that I liked. So that's kind of how we started. And then I realized that like no one can see this, so I moved on to the other color. And I was just uploading some instructions for doing other decorative knots. But I don't really enjoy following those written instructions, or they're like, go here and go here. So I just did it freehand. And that was probably the most fun I've had for an hour. I don't really do crafts because I just always knit. But I have all these ideas for things, and then I buy vintage buttons. Here's a sample of one and another one. So these may ultimately go on the peace symbol. Thought I had something else here. So these are lids to these square plastic boxes, obtainable from the Container Store. They're not cheap. But so I use the boxes to store yarn in because I can see or, projects. But then I don't want the lids, but they're great for little crafting projects. Because I can see what I've got. They're not deep, so I can't get too much in them. So I've had an interesting week. I have not really been knitting, which is so unusual for me. And I'm feeling a little guilty. But it's just been kind of a hectic week. Hey, Anne Marie. So I think I'll give myself a pass. And I want to do all these other things, but I need to get back to my knitting. So I think I'll maybe work on this tonight and get that covered. And, because it's martini night, so I can't really do a lot of knitting. And I'm working on projects that it actually matters that I don't make a screw up in them. So tomorrow we will go down to a park that's about 1.25 miles away, to go to the No Kings rally. And then they're marching to downtown and to Seattle Center, which is probably at least a couple of miles from here. So Mitch's foot is not up for that sort of thing. So we're just going to the rally and then we'll come back and eat lunch. But we'll have made our presence known. The last time we went to one of these rallies, I just loved seeing who showed up and the signs that they carried. Some of them were very clever. And I'm not really, I wouldn't consider myself a political activist, but I feel very strongly that we are not in a good space, so I need to show up. But then I will be coming home to have my completely bougie baguette and cheese. Oh dear. So not a lot to report on the knitting front. Oh, I know. I've got this book, which, it's put out by, what is it? 910 Publications. So they publish only Canadian authors. And it's called The True Cost of Wool, A Vision for Revitalizing the Canadian Industry. And with a foreword by Clara Parks and something from the gal at Ancient Art Fibers on the back blurbs, I guess, from Ancient Arts Fiber Crafts, Tin Can Knits, and Briggs and Little Woolen Mill. So I'll be starting to read that, and I'll eventually do a review. I know Kim Worker, who's the publisher, in another context, and the author is Anna Hunter. I cannot imagine trying to ship all these books to the U.S. They've been threatening a postal strike in Canada for months. And so a lot of people just, changed to other carriers. But I think the most efficient and cheapest way to get things across the border is through the Postal Service. So I had paid for priority or flat rate mailing. So whatever service they used for that, it came through very quickly because I think they mailed them earlier this week. And it came today. But Yeah, Canadian Post, it's sometimes really unreliable. But I think she's in Vancouver, and I assume that she had an expediter who just, like, has access to getting things across to the US Postal Service pretty easily. Um, so I'm looking forward to reading about that. So I listened to a book recently called, we'll never know what it's called, um, but it was about how hard it is to bring clothing manufacturing to the US. So remember a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the socks that I'd gotten. And so I'd heard about Scano, it's Zkano socks, um, in that book. And so, they are considered a success story, um, because they're still in business, but I think it's been a real struggle. And it's really hard to do manufacturing where labor costs are high. And of course, one of the problems with wool is that you have to raise the animals. And then you have to get the wool milled, and, so you have to get it cleaned. I'm not sure what that's called. Um, and that's not always done by the same people who actually spin the yarn. They're mills. And so you're paying for a lot of transportation, and, you've paid for transportation to, um, feed the sheep over the winter, especially, I would imagine, in Canada. Um, you have to take care of them, and, what else was I gonna say? Oh, so you have to feed them, you have to take care of them, medicine, all that sort of thing. And then getting it milled is not easy, and usually it goes to smaller mills because they aren't producing enough to, like, send it to a fully commercial mill. Um, and somehow, and we can just look around these days, we expect things to be not expensive. But when you think of what's involved in producing things, like, we're like, if they get rid of immigrant labor, food is gonna get super expensive, um, either because they can't get it harvested or because they have to pay people more than the immigrant laborers make. So it seems to me that we have kind of a disconnect between what things actually cost and what we wanna pay for them. And, um, we may find ourselves a little jammed up and having no choice but to pay. I'm getting like it, so my dress form is almost the same color as my hair. So and I'm showing too much ceiling, sorry. Um, so I'm interested to hear what she has to say, or to read what she has to say about bringing wool to market. Um, it's nearly impossible to do clothes here because of how expensive it is. And like I said, the sock company, I think that they survive, but I'm not sure that they're, like, highly profitable. Um, so anyhow, that's, one of my things that I'm always thinking about. Last night, we went to, It's called Town Hall, and they often have authors come do a presentation on their book. And so this was billed as a conversation between the author and this other person. And when they introduced the other person, whose name was Brian Lanphier, I believe, he's on Substack. It was all about health effects of lead. Was his background, and I thought, well, I'm really interested, like, is he related to the author? Like, what the hell is he gonna talk about? So, we have a joke here because I love murder. So, love murder mysteries, love anything like that. I love TV shows, I love documentaries about murder. I used to read true crime books. So, when we sit down to watch documentaries, I'm often like, "Murder? Is there any murder?" And the pickings are getting a little slim because we've seen so much. Um, but the author, who's like a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, during the pandemic had gone down a few rabbit holes, and she said she'd always wondered, like, why there seemed to be a fair number of serial killers in Washington State, um, and related to Washington State. And of course, they're also in Oregon and California. But so she started just poking around. And I think she started with Ted Bundy because he is probably the most famous serial killer. But then in her poking around, she realized that Ted Bundy, the man who was known as the Green River Killer, I have never learned his name, and Charles Manson had all lived in the Tacoma area, and Tacoma used to have a huge Asarco smelting operation. And when I was growing up, it was called the Aroma of Tacoma. And like as kids, we would try and hold our breath driving through Tacoma because it smelled so vile. And it wasn't until the 80s and the EPA really got busy, they started to wind down operations in the 80s, and they finally completed that process in the 90s. So, just as so the Green River Killer had grown up near SeaTac Airport. Ted Bundy had lived in Tacoma, let's say from 5 to 12. And Charles Manson had spent some quality time at McNeil Federal Prison, which was on an island just off the coast from Tacoma. So, anyhow, the long and short of it was that lead exposure creates violence, particularly among men. And they've done all sorts of studies, or they've done MRIs on brains of people who've had high exposure to lead, and far more common among men that their brains are impacted than women, because there is a chromosome that protects, or, something that protects against that sort of thing, but it's carried on the X chromosome. So men only get one shot at getting it. Women get two shots at getting that protection. I was fascinated. And he did a very good job of explaining what lead poisoning does in layman's terms. And, he's looked to be a man in his 60s, and that's what he's done. I haven't looked into what his educational background is, but I'm gathering he's a PhD of some sort. And of course, upset about changes in the NIH grant giving process. But that was like super interesting to me. So then we have also watched documentaries on Indigenous women, particularly in Canada, who they just, are kidnapped and disappear. And I said to Mitch, I bet there's smelters up there in the Alberta, Saskatchewan. So I'll have to look that up. And then I started thinking about what I've learned in my research on FIT and about why women seem to have an inordinate number of women seem to have huge breasts these days. And, I remember one or two women that did when I was growing up. And I've always kind of mentally attributed it to chemicals. But I don't have any evidence know anything more than that clearly something is getting mistriggered and causing girls to start menses at 8. All I can say is, my God, can you imagine what that's like to be 8 years old and all of a sudden start bleeding? But I'm mostly interested in the breast because it makes it hard to fit clothes. So, those were my takeaways from that lecture. And then we came home and ate dinner and had ice cream because it's just murder. I just find it fascinating. So Mitch pointed out that 90% of the audience was women, and probably most of the men were there with women rather than they're under their own accord. It wasn't a huge crowd. It was less than 100 people. But anyhow, yeah, you never know what you're going to get when you go see some author talk. And I had done no research. I just saw the book is called Murderland. And I was like, oh, yeah, we're going. And then we had to leave because people start asking stupid questions, and I can't stand it. So when I came back from H&H, I got COVID, and then I tried to recover from that so we could go on our rescheduled trip to the Bay Area, all of which happened once I got over COVID, bounced back pretty quickly. But then there's I had 2 weeks of when I hadn't really worked because I'd been at H&H and then I'd been sick. And so we had like a week to catch up. And then we went to the Bay Area where I saw my friend Nancy, who's I've known since I was 4 years old. And then we went to San Francisco and hung out and went to museums and ate, a lot of eating, and went to the East Bay to see friends. And the friend that we saw, it's a couple, and Trina has been dabbling in knitting for as long as I've known her. I may have taught her to knit. I can't recall. Um, and so she said, "Do you mind looking at my knitting?" And it wasn't because she was having any problems. It was because she just wanted to show it off. And, so we talked about how she's been working on a top-down pullover, and she's, like, below the armholes, but needs to figure out whether it's the right size or not. So I told her how to take it off onto a cord and wash it, and then try it on once it's dry to see how it will fit. And, um, she's making a scarf out of very similar yarn, but in a different weight, and then has another similar yarn in a different color that she wants to make a vest out of. And so I've seen her kind of grow from, making a scarf and then waiting 2 years and maybe making another scarf to actually tackling projects on her own. And so we were at the restaurant we were going to eat at and waiting for our table. And she said, I can tell when I make a mistake and fix it now. And I also, there's Bruce Lanphier. I was just talking, Bruce, about the presentation last night and where my brain went when I heard you talking about the lead poisoning. And I was going to send you a message on Substack because I'm interested in things that trigger like excessive breast development in women. And I realize that's not your area, but I thought you might be able to point me in the right direction. But I was convinced after hearing you last night that my gut feeling that it is chemicals that are causing it. I was just very excited when I left. And I had to leave early because I hate those questions. But anyhow, back to what was I talking about? Trina gaining confidence and kind of getting to the point where she felt like she's the boss of her knitting. And she realized that when she is working on a big project, like a pullover, that she's got to have another project that's easier and that she can carry around. So anyhow, it was really fun to admire her yarn. And then I got an email from her a couple days later saying she wanted to make a blanket out of what's going to be the leftover yarn from these projects. And how could she do it using seed stitch? And so I sent her a few tips, totally within her capabilities. But it's always really fun to see somebody get to the point with their knitting that they're like, I got this, I can do it. So anyhow, I think that's about all I have today. I wouldn't say I'm tired. I just feel like I've spread myself a little thin. I started Open Knit Design Camp, and it's been really fun. But when I have to talk to people 3 times in one day, that's a lot for me. And I actually talked to somebody else because an editor who I talked to at H&H is interested in having me join her magazine team as a columnist. So we talked today about what I have to offer and what she has to offer to me. And so now I have to write an article, which will be kind of fun. She gave me like what she wants. And that's great because I can write anything. I just need to know, and I don't always know what someone's audience wants. So I had morning camp where Iris and I talked, and then I talked to Carla and went down to the post office because so people order my How to Knit book. I have to say, I'm always kind of like, really? Because nobody buys books to learn anything anymore. I totally get it because I learned from printed page better than I learned from videos, and I find videos annoying. She said, creating a video as we speak. But I'm just always surprised that they find me and my book, and I never get orders unless I'm out of town and can't actually mail them. So I always have to contact them and say, do you want your money back or can you wait till I get back? So I had a couple of books to mail off and a thank you gift to Nancy. And Mitch is getting documents he's applied for citizenship in Poland, because that's what his heritage is. And it would get him an EU passport. So I don't have any connections close enough to be able to do that. But his grandparents emigrated back in his dad's family was back in the 30s, I think, before the war. And then his mom's family came after the war. But I think maybe her dad had come before the war. There was like 7 years. So he left when she was a baby, and they arrived in the US when she was 8, I think. So he had to get sent off to get some documents authenticated. So he applied 2 or 3 years ago, but because of all the Ukrainians who have been trying to get Polish citizenship, he did not rise to the head of the line until recently. And then they looked at the documents and just said, like, we need these things authenticated. So, and he's got this foot that's never recovered from being broken, and I can steam down the street fast. And our car is in the body shop. So it's been interesting. I have to walk 5 blocks to QFC to do grocery shopping, which would normally not be a big deal. But because we'd been out of town, I had first we had COVID. So we ate through everything while we had COVID. And then I bought food, but I didn't buy a lot because we were going down to California. And so I'm like having to fill in quite a bit, which means I have to walk down the street. But then I get my walk in, and it's good. My problem is always like, when am I going to take time off from work so that I can do that? But I needed to get those books in the mail, so I had no choice. And so, as I said, I've got nothing on the knitting front. I had to tear a project back. It's 2 colors. God, I don't like doing 2 colors. I get these balls, they get all twisted, and not good at it. And I made just a huge mental mistake, so I had to rip it back, and I need to get back to it. So last night I untwisted all the yarn and made neat little balls so I can work on it again. And I've got another project that I'm working on in the same yarn. And I woke up this morning thinking I need to block that piece that I'm knitting, because I think I used a different size needle than I'd used before. And that I completely forgot. So the joy of being 70 is that things that occur to you early in the morning do not necessarily stick with you. So I've remembered a couple times, but always when I was doing something else. And I just have like notes around. I've got piles of stuff. So I unpacked, but literally in my office, I just dumped everything out of my carry-ons. And so I have piles of stuff, and then I've had to get new piles of stuff. Like my tray had to get that out of the closet, and I haven't put a single thing away since I got home. My clothes all got put away. Laundry's done. I'm ready to start a fresh week, but I think that right now I need to. It's almost time for the music hour, and so I need to get myself organized so I have something to do during that. I'm making calzone tonight, so I have to make some dough. And then at 6:30, I get to have my martini and reset the entire week. So thank you all for showing up. And Bruce, I don't know whether you're still here, but really enjoyed that talk last night. And I am going to eventually buy the book, but I just bought another book, so we'll have to wait. But I thought you were both really excellent. And you did a great job of making what I'm sure is very technical, easily accessible to, as you now know, somebody who's a knitwear designer. I don't know anything about lead. But I grew up here, and I know all about the aroma of Tacoma. And I love the connection because I'm a true crime fan. So the connection to lead was just really fascinating for me. And I will send you a message to ask you if you know anybody who's written about females and the impacts of chemicals on their hormonal experience. Because my specialty is helping people make things that fit them. And obviously, if you have huge breasts, it's really a problem. And it seems to often be accompanied by obesity. And it's a problem for people to get things that fit. But when we make our own things, it's possible. So on that happy note, and you can see behind me in the background, I've got my 2 dress forms. So they're actually the same size body. And the one that's pink, I padded. So it would be, so it turns out Iris is a big murder fan too. So she's going to buy the book. But so I padded out that body to be more like what people look like once they've put on some extra weight. And that's what really fascinates me. And what I spend a lot of my time doing. So anyhow, thank you for joining me. I hope I have more to talk about next week. Bye.